5, chapter 4 on the possibilities of encouragement. You're being summoned. The possibilities of encouragement. Of course, we're using the Barnabas factor with Aubrey Johnson's book on the ministry of encouragement. And we've looked at the last 2 weeks at the matters pertaining to discouragement and particular ways to overcome discouragement. And the two that we noted in particular last week as we closed were the matters of prayer and fellowship. And we used Nehemiah as an example, particularly in Nehemiah chapter 4, where in 2 cases the children of Israel were opposed by the enemies of righteousness, and in both cases they made their prayer to God. And then we noted the situation with the building, the actual construction of the wall. And we noted that phrase, and next to him, and next to him, and next to him, about 13 or 14 times there, next to him. And so we see that working together in fellowship and harmony with one another is a means of encouragement, or a means to overcome discouragement. And so the idea of working together and staying busy is always helpful. And then that leads us into this lesson on the possibilities of encouragement. In other words, what are some places or situations that can and ought to be encouraging, but perhaps sometimes are not encouraging. And so that's where we are in this on the opening page. And the opening paragraph deals with what's called encouragement zones. In other words, places where people can either be encouraged or discouraged. And of course, the first one listed, and of course, some of these aren't as applicable to me because of the situation I have with my work. But for most of you, work can be a place of encouragement or discouragement. Many folks are blessed to have good work environments. I just happened to see the death of a particular newspaper editor, and somebody was opining about the death of that individual, and he made the statement. He said, "I worked for her for 18 months, and every day was a joy." Now, surely that can't be absolutely true that every day was a joy, but to think back, on that time as a general rule, as a joy, is a blessing. I think about Sheila and the work that she had in Winfield, and the environment that she had and her co-workers. Was work is work, but work can be a joy, and so work can be a very encouraging place. And then on the other hand, work can be a very discouraging place. I think about going to the nursing homes and seeing the staff, and I genuinely love the people that work at the Hamilton nursing home. I love them. I appreciate them, and they're very encouraging to me, and they're very encouraging generally to one another and to the residents. And it makes all the difference in the world, the attitude that they bring to work every day. And so, but at the same time, that's a difficult place to work, and turnover can be extreme. As general, turnover is extremely high in those types of places. Well, why is it high? Well, because it can be so discouraging. But those that are able to maintain longevity, there's the key to that is what they bring to work every day. And they bring a good attitude that they're going to share that encouragement with others from one day to the next. And so obviously work can be one or the other. The second that was listed here is the matter of the home. I've preached somewhat on the home in recent weeks and months, and I probably don't do it enough, just to be honest with you. If I were to go back and look over the number of sermons preached in the last 5 or 6 years and make that calculation. Probably haven't preached enough on it. But one thing that I do try to say and encourage is to make our homes a respite from what goes on in the world. In other words, if you have a bad work environment, then it would be almost an imperative to come home to a good home environment. And if you had a bad work environment and a bad home environment, it would be very, very difficult, for a person to have any level of encouragement for themselves, much less to be able to encourage others. And so, it is incumbent on every single child of God to make sure that their home is a place of encouragement and not a place of discouragement. And of course, in some cases, folks have to work harder. For example, if you were married to a non-Christian or somebody that wasn't particularly interested in spiritual matters, your work is going to be more difficult. Because that person may not share your outlook on life, but they certainly wouldn't share your desire to create an encouraging environment in the sense that God would have it to be. And then those that have lost their spouses, it's very difficult. Their job is harder because maybe going through life, there's somebody you had that you could lean on, the way that God intended it. But now that person is gone. And so now it's incumbent upon you to shoulder the entire load of encouragement for your children or your grandchildren or wherever. And so, it can be very difficult for a single individual, especially one that has lost a spouse. To have the kind of encouragement that they need. And then that brings us, obviously, to the third and the most important one, at least in my mind, is the church. The church can be a place of encouragement. It should be. God intended for the church to be a place of encouragement. But tragically, the church, many times, and when I mean the church, I mean the local church. The local church can be a place of discouragement. That, for example, if a church is marred by continual griping or bickering, in other words, there's never a settled peace in a local congregation. You can literally dread. You can look forward to worship as a Christian, but on the other hand, you can dread the environment that you go into. And which in turn affects your ability to worship God the way you want to worship God and be encouraged the way that you should be encouraged. And so, but the church of all places should be a respite. Again, if you have a bad work environment and you have a bad home environment, then the church is a last resort of sorts and needs to be a place where people are encouraged, where they are built up, where they are appreciated, or where people feel appreciated, where it's verbalized, it's realized in the way that folks interact with one another, that they are loved and that they are appreciated, and sometimes that's all some people have is the encouragement that they receive at church, and then. But a church that is not at peace, that is not unified, that is not encouraging, can be a very, very difficult place to be. And that's not the way that God designed it. Of course, he talks about the church here at the bottom, and was intended to be mankind's supreme encouragement zone. And I wrote down 1 Corinthians 12 to 27, which talks about the body. That the church is a body, and that all the body parts have a function, and that they work together in harmony with one another as a cohesive and growing unit. But there's something else I want us to think about with regard to the encouragement of the early church. And that is that the early church suffered persecution. There were people that wanted Christians dead. There were people who did everything they could to make the lives of Christians miserable. Where was the respite for that? Where was the place of rest? Where was the place of encouragement for those folks? It was in the local church, especially when you consider, in large part, how disconnected people were. Maybe in those days, in the fact that the church was a central location to bring everybody together. In other words, maybe you didn't see a lot of Christians during the week based on where you lived or whatever. And so you looked forward to those assemblies. For example, in Hebrews 10:25, not forsaking the assembling of yourselves together, but exhorting one another. And so much the more as you see the day approaching. He's talking about overcoming the discouragement of persecution. Nowadays we're very connected. Now there's some senses in which as a society we're disconnected, but we're pretty connected because, if I want to call Sean, if I want to talk to Sean, I don't have to set aside half a day to walk to Sean's house and hope that he's home. I don't have to, I can just pick up a cell phone, shoot him a text, shoot him a call, or just send him a text, say, what's going on? You got a minute to talk, or with all of the connectivity that we have, we can be connected even though we're not in the same room, and we can encourage one another without having to be face to face with one another. The difficulty is that oftentimes we don't use the methods or the means that we have at our disposal to be as encouraging, as we could. And so we need to use the methods that we have, whether it be a text message or a phone call or, the mail or, so many ways that we can communicate and encourage others from day to day. And so the church is the source there. On page 46. On page 46, again, thinking about the church, and Brother Johnson, in the first full paragraph, talks about how Satan has attempted to counterfeit the atmosphere of the church in numerous secular settings. People join service organizations or frequent entertainment establishments, searching for a place where they belong. Searching for a place where they belong. I'm going to throw a line out at you and you tell me if you recognize it. Where everybody knows your name. Cheers. That's right. Cheers. And what was Cheers? It was a bar. And what was the signature moment? What was the signature moment in every episode of Cheers? Norm! That's right. Norm walks in and everybody in the building shouts Norm. Well, you think about it. That's the very thing that's being described here is that the devil has created counterfeits of what the church is and ought to be. Because what do you find? What do you find at Cheers? You have Norm is an accountant, and Cliff is a mail carrier, and Sam is an ex-baseball player, and who knows what Woody was, and Carla's she's the single mom, trying to make it. And you have Diane, who's the aspiring actress, the theater. But you have all these different people from all these different walks of life coming into a common area, again, where everybody knows your name. And so you see that a lot of people frequent those types of environments because they're looking for what the church is designed to offer. And so I love that line, and that's what I thought of when I read that. All right, and then he says, For monthly dues or a night's cover charge, they hope to find something to care about and someone to care about them. Why do people go to places like that? They're lonely. They're lonely. The happily married man with a house full of kids doesn't frequent a place like that, or at least he shouldn't. Right? I mean, everything that person needs should be found at home. If he wants to find somebody or something to care about, it's at home. And if he wants to find somebody to care about him, it's at home. And so, I think about, just to be honest with you, I could think about my own dad. He lived in, he had a job when we lived in Dexter. He lived in Memphis. It was about, at that time when the speed limit was still 55, it's close to 3 hours away. And, he worked Monday to Friday, and he'd come back to Dexter on Friday. But the very first place he went when he got back to Dexter, when he got off work, was the bar in the back of Hickory Log Restaurant. And I always knew that because where we lived in town was on a hill, and you could see straight from the house to the Hickory Log. You could see the Hickory Log Restaurant from our house. And you could see the rear entrance to the lounge, and you could see my dad had a big old 76 model Cadillac that was about as long as this auditorium. I mean, you couldn't hide that thing. But you think, here's a guy that's been gone all week. He's been gone all week. But where does he end up as soon as he gets home after being gone all week? Is he goes to a place like that. And by the way, he was always like that. When I was a little kid, we lived in St. Louis. It was the same thing. As soon as he got off work at Chrysler, he'd go to the bar at the I believe it was the Best Western or something like that. There was a hotel with a lounge across Interstate 44. But you just think about why would somebody choose that over their family? And so they're looking for something to care about or someone to care about them. All right. They want to talk about their triumphs. They want to talk about their troubles. They want to feel like somebody listens. Note, it says the church should recognize this universal desire to connect and converse because it alone offers meaningful answers to what ails mankind. Where again in the world's idea, where do you go and who do you talk to talk about your troubles? Say it, Kyle. The bartender. You go to the bar and you go to the bartender, and the bartender listens to all your troubles. All right? Now, is the bartender going to give you good answers for you? Probably not. He's probably not the best advice giver. What? Yeah, just like some of your dumb friends, Sean. Yeah. Dennis is your friend, right?
Yeah, he gives good advice.
Oh, does he give good advice? Okay. And the reason I mentioned it, because Sean and I made a joke about that, because when the Aniana group was here and I was telling those kids that they were dumb and their friends were even dumber, and after church, Sean says, Dennis is my friend. But, it's in Proverbs 19 where the wise man tells his son, says, cease, my son, from listening to instruction that causes you to err. In other words, quit going to places that give you bad advice. And I just can't imagine that the bartender is a good advice giver. And so, first of all, because he works in a bar. That ought to be the first indication that he may not be the best psychologist, although he might. I guess he could. Yeah, he's the listener. That's right. I guess that's right. He's the listener. All right, and so. The church can provide these things and ought to provide these respites for people who want to talk about their triumphs or their troubles. All right. Then in the next paragraph, it says encouragement is essential wherever there are people. Look, everybody needs encouragement. In other words, encouragement is not peculiar to any one individual. We all need to be encouraged. The question is, how can the various realms of life be made into encouragement zones? It says the first thing to remember is that people can make the world a more encouraging place only to the extent that they themselves become more encouraging. You know, what I thought about was, there's an old saying, I don't remember where it came from, but it says, be the change that you wish to see in others. In other words, if you want the world to be a more encouraging place, the first thing to do is for me to be more encouraging. Also, the old Coca-Cola slogan, to think globally but act locally. In other words, think about the large-scale impact, but realize that the large-scale impact begins in the local place. And so in the church is the same. If I want my church to be more encouraging, then I've got to be more encouraging. And if I want the world to be more encouraging, then I start with me. All right. So now look at there's a list of questions there to ask of the individual, but look in the obstacles of encouragement. All right. First of all, there's society's definitions of, for example, what constitutes success, as opposed to what God would determine as being successful. Society is prone to define success in terms of superiority to others. In other words, I'm only successful if I'm climbing up ahead of others. If I make more money, I've got to make more money than my neighbor. I have to drive a nicer truck than my neighbor. I got to have a nicer house, or I've got to have things that in other words, I'm encouraged by the things that I have and not by who I am and the people with whom I associate. And also, oftentimes people are discouraged despite the contributions they can make to the world around them. I love the line, the runner-up in a beauty pageant may think of herself as the first loser. Now, NASCAR drivers think in those terms. I remember watching a race one time, and a guy who very rarely had any real success on the racetrack, somebody said something to him about finishing in second place and congratulated him. And he said, second place is just the first loser. He said, I'm just the first loser. And, but in that particular sport, there is the desire to be first. But in other areas, we can still contribute to the welfare of others without having to be first, without having to be the best. And so we don't want to judge our value to the world based on some kind of pecking order that we have or that we find ourselves in the world. The fourth place finisher in the Olympics might feel like a loser because he was the first guy not to get up on the podium, and get a medal. But when you think about what does it take to be the fourth fastest man in the world? Think about that. Let's say you made the Olympics and you finished fourth in the finals of the 100 meters. That means out of 7.3 billion people on the planet, there's only 3 guys on the planet faster than you. That's pretty tall cotton if you want to think about it. Now look, we understand the desire. We understand the desire to excel and to exceed. But sometimes we have a misplaced value or misplaced idea on our own value based on some preconceived or false narrative about where we fit in the broad scheme of things. Then I love where he goes next. He says, middle-class Americans may consider themselves poor because their lifestyles do not compare to a favorite TV star or sports figure or whoever you want to mention. But the truth of the matter is, a middle-class American is richer than about 90% of the rest of the world. Our problem is most of us never see that other 90%. We just see what goes on around us, and then what is right here before us, and the success of others. Somebody's got a 20 or 30,000 square foot house. And I can remember, I can't remember how many years ago it was. Can't be a whole lot of years ago. It was LeBron James had built a house in Ohio shortly after he became a professional athlete, and the closet in his master bedroom, I remember this distinctly, the closet in his master bedroom was the size of the church parsonage. Because somebody made mention that the walk-in closet in his house was 2,200 square feet. And I looked at Rhonda and I said, this house is 2,200 square feet, or right there about it. Now look, that's just the way that, I didn't feel like I was the worst person because LeBron James had a closet the size of my house. But some people might. But some people might. And so again, we have to. Of course, look, going to Africa 14 times will adjust your view of how wealthy you are. You don't have to go to Africa. You can go to some poor places in America too. But when you go to a third world country, it really adjusts your view about what you really have. When you think about, like for me, when I think about a friend of mine over there, Samuel Coben, had a child to die, and all that would have taken to save his child was medicine that would have cost me $5 in America. But he didn't even have access. He didn't have the money or the access, to the medicine. I believe it was also Brother Coben that had a son who had a problem with his eye. His eye was turned in, and the church here helped his son have a surgery. For us, I think it might have cost us $200 or $300. And we sent the money over there, and they carried him to Cape Coast, and he got him some surgery, and he got him some corrective glasses, and everything's good now. Well, but you think about, it was a big ordeal for him. Whereas we wouldn't think twice about something like that. And so, we are extremely wealthy by the standards of the world, and so we should not be discouraged, particularly by our place here in America. Then the top of page 47, man, this is a difficult one for a lot of people. The matter of seclusion. Now, I would say there are two types of seclusion. There is a seclusion that is the result of life circumstances that people may have a hard time overcoming. For example, let's say, there are more of these than I'd care to think about, but you think about maybe a widow who can't drive. Here's a widow who can't drive. There's a lot of them. It amazes me how many people still have never got a driver's license. All right? So here's a widow that can't drive. She lives somewhere out between here and Piney Grove. She has a house. Her house is probably paid for, and she may have sufficient funds to pay, keep her light bill, keep her lights on and all that. But not having any means to go anywhere, there's a seclusion. All right? That can cause people to be very, not only isolated but discouraged. All right? Then there are people who, for whatever reason, decide to kind of hold themselves up in a place, and they just don't want to get out at all. They have the ability to get out, but for whatever reason, they don't exercise the ability to get out. Sit around, and they don't go anywhere, and half time don't turn the lights on. Maybe got the television on or something, and they refuse. They refuse to interact with others, and that's a very difficult situation. And by the way, when you go visit those people, it's not a very encouraging visit. because those people tend to have a very negative view of life. And I think one of the reasons is they sit and they watch too much television. Man, I mean, if all a person did all day was watch television, they'd for sure think this world's fixing to blow up any minute. You know, and they don't see any of the good things that are out there. And so seclusion is a problem, is an obstacle to encouragement. And then the second paragraph there is, that's why it is critical to attend the services of the church. You know, if that's all you can do, that's still Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. And then perhaps any of the other events. You know, as long as a person can stay plugged into the church, they're always going to have that outlet to be encouraged. And so the assemblies are vital to overcoming the obstacle of seclusion and discouragement. And he talks about just different things that go on in the local church. All right, then the third one I think kind of goes back to the first one. He talks about low self-esteem. Now, it's not directly tied to societal definitions, but in a lot of ways it can be. But people that don't have, we'll say, a healthy level of self-esteem will have a hard time being encouraged, much less trying to encourage somebody else. And in those cases, those people, when they do try to encourage others, the only way they know to encourage others is by putting themselves down. In other words, they try to say something that makes another person feel better, but it always ends up is that you can do this, but I could never do that. I could never, you're so good at this, I could never do that. And so the encouragement comes, but it always comes at their own expense. Whereas genuine encouragement flows out of the integrity of somebody's heart, and by me giving you encouragement, I haven't lost anything. I don't have to tear myself down to build you up, and I don't have to falsely build you up, with false ideas or platitudes or whatever. Encouragement, flows from the heart, and so low self-esteem can be a problem. Lack of experience. And this is where this whole book is going. That encouragement is a ministry, and that some people are naturally good encouragers. But many of us are not naturally good encouragers. We have to work at it. And one thing that I did for me when we started this book is that I have a little banner reminders on my phone. I have a daily prayer list that pops up on my phone every morning on people that I need to pray for. And, I can adjust that. I can edit that. But the banner that pops up first every morning and pops up at various times through the day says this: be an encourager today. So 5 or 6 times a day I'm going to look at my phone, and that phone's going to say, even when I don't open it, even when I just, when I just pick it up, that banner, that little banner's on the screen. And it says in that banner, be an encourager today. In other words, it reminds me several times every single day to be an encourager. By the way, I have found it extremely helpful. Extremely helpful. Just that reminder, be an encourager today. And so, and the reason I think that this method encourages me is because a lot of times you can put things on the refrigerator to remind you, but then you get accustomed to seeing them and then you don't see them, right? They're there, but because you might go to the refrigerator 2, 3, 10 times a day, you don't see it even though it's there. But see, every time I pick my phone up, it might be at different times in different places during the. I might be at the nursing home, or I might be at Walmart, or I might if I got to pick up my list. I got my list of things to get at Walmart. I pull my phone out, and what's staring me in the face? Be an encourager today. Be an encourager today. And so that's been very helpful to me to remind me to work at being an encourager. And so little things like that help us. In other words, I'm trying to learn to be a better encourager. And then lastly is in this list is inadequate commitment. Anything that requires proficiency also requires persistence. In other words, if I want to be a good anything, I've got to pursue that thing, and then I've got to stay at it. And even if I can get to a point of proficiency, if I stop, I'll lose what I have. I think about Devin, or I think about Shannon Mays. Now, some of you have never heard Shannon play. You may have heard Devin play, and Devin's really, really good. He's really good. But I'm pretty sure that when Shannon's on his game, Shannon's better. I can remember when Shannon got a call a number of years ago to go play a show, I think in Florida, and it was some of the biggest names in bluegrass music. I'm talking about big name people. And I'm like, man, that ought to be a piece of cake. Just go down there and play a show. No. He jumped on that banjo and he started playing that thing 5, 6, 7 hours a day for weeks at a time, getting ready to just go down and play 2 shows. Why? Well, in my mind, he could have picked that thing up and played, and I thought, man, that's the greatest thing I've ever heard. But he realized that if he's going to do it and do it right, that he'd laid his banjo down too long. He had to get back after it. In other words, had to get back to where he was before. Well, the same thing goes with Bible memory work. If you don't stay at it, you'll lose it. Being an encourager. If you don't stay at it, you lose it. So anything that requires proficiency also requires persistence or perseverance. And so we want to be committed to being better encouragers. I'll tell you something. I'll give you an example of one way where I failed in this. If you have a birthday that's in the first 3 or 4 months of this year, you've probably got a birthday card from me at some point in time. All right? But if you have a birthday that falls after the month of April, you probably never got a birthday card from me. Because 2 or 3 times in the last 10 years, I've determined that I was going to take the bulletin and look at everybody that had a birthday and try to send them a birthday card, send everybody a birthday card through the course of the year. And somehow by April, I've lost it. I realized I hadn't sent a card in 2 or 3 weeks. So what happened? Well, I dropped the ball. But I need to get. If I'm going to do that, I need to get on it and stay after it. Now, the one thing I have managed to do for the most part is keep up with the kids. And usually all the kids get $5 in their birthday card, and it says go to Snowbiz, because that's the only place you can go in town with a $5 bill and get something for you and somebody else for $5. All right, so I try to do my best to remember the kids, but that's one of those things that I've done it 2 or 3 times. I've got started, and then something happened, and I just fell off and didn't get picked back up. So encouragement is the same way. All right, now next week, the bottom of page 47 is the lesson, the lesson moves to the essentials of Christianity with regard to encouragement. And so we will start at the bottom of page 47, Lord willing, next week.